Okay, hey guys, and Kian here. So this is going to be a quick update for what I'm working on with Shenmue Animations. And what you're seeing right now is my test environment for actually testing the animations. And as you can see right now, Shenmue just does the really lamest, least energetic soccer kick in existence, and then just kind of stops for a while. So this is my first try. As far as first tries go, this isn't actually all that bad, considering that most of the times with animations, first tries generally end up with an explosion of bones and horrible mess and contorted uh, meshes and just things that you shouldn't really see at all. So the fact that um, even for not being a very uh, accurate first try, it's still a somewhat acceptable first try. So um, I haven't dealt with inverse kinematics before, so just managing to set up the environment and having something that I can get an idea of how the different parts are working and have the syntax sugar working is generally a pretty good start for me. So um, in terms of Shamu, uh, I can go over here, and since this is in code, I can change this from inverse kinematics and then go back to forward kinematics right away. So whichever one doesn't really actually matter that much, just because what? No, I so we're we're here to Pinocchio foot. So it doesn't really matter that much because it's pretty easy. It's easy enough to switch back and forth between each one. And generally, I looked at other samples, so we can copy this, uh, open a new tab, and there's a Miku Miku Dance example that I think was made by Takahiro X. I think he's the one that does most of the examples. And I'm recording while playing this on a pretty old computer, so that's why the frame rate is horrible. But if we go through, and so the character starts dancing, and what we can do is we can turn off IK, and what will happen is the character's legs would just go completely straight. So what's going on here is there are target nodes, which are these red things, and there's effector bones, which are the green things, and then there's the chain, which are these purple things on the legs. So what's happening is if you just go with forward kinematics, all that's happening with forward kinematics is her thighs and her body that's gonna set where the base of the arm goes. And it looks like the arms are done with forward kinematics as well. So everything is just defined with bones. And then you can see the red target bones moving here, and that's where the foot is going to try to plant itself if it's there. So if you turn on IK, the foot will then calculate a certain amount of times each second where it wants to be, and then it'll go through and calculate the rotations for where the knees and thighs should be. And so that kind of, from looking at Shenmue, that kind of seems to be a similar approach to what they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the animation, go back here. So um, here we have a pretty horrible result that doesn't look like what the game does at all. What looks like it happens, it's kind of going in an arc, and it's the foot is traveling somewhat in an arc, and it's traveling way too far forward for what it really should be. That doesn't really make sense in terms of what you actually see in the game, because Shenmue's foot never extends that far forward. But what could be happening is if the root starts at 0, 0, 0, and the animation is moving towards 1 or past 1, it might not be the distance from the point of where Shenmue is out plus 1. It might be starting from the root at 0, 0, 0 relative to the origin, relative to where Shenmue is, or relative to where Rio is. So it kind of depends on. There's two things that could be wrong. We could either have the values be wrong, or we could have the interpretation be wrong. As far as the values go, we've got um, what I'm encouraged about is the values we're getting very, very reasonable values. There's definitely times where the game just doesn't even define the value. It gives you curve value and that doesn't define the value, and the value is missing. What I think is happening there is the game's just updating. The game has a curve for how the F curve moves, and it's just updating the curve for how it bends or how far it should go back, and it's not setting a keyframe at that point. It's just updating how that rate of change for that point. So I guess we have to go through and calculate for every frame of what the actual value should be. But as far as values go, we're getting pretty reasonable values. All the frames are what you expect. The variables that we are reading generally seem to be within range of what you would expect the animation for the different, for the different proportions being used. Because let's say, Ryo from his feet to his chest is about 1.1 units, I guess just over a meter or something like that. And, most of these coordinates seem to be within, 0 and 1, and then don't seem to be changing that much. So the values that we are getting are actually reasonable. And actually reading through the values, with the interpretation that we have now, is you end up right at the end, at the very end of each of the respective blocks. And what's really encouraging about that is normally if you have a parser that's wrong, you'll seek way past the end of the file. You'll end up in the middle of the file. You'll end up, you'll get the wrong values. Things will just be crazy. Things will just be nuts, and you'll get errors, and it just won't look right at all. So I think in terms of reading the correct values, I think it's pretty safe to say that yes, we're reading the correct values, and now we just have to work on interpretation for how they're working. So obviously this isn't the right interpretation, but at least we have a test environment to work on to start comparing, okay, the game does this for these specific set of values. Let's break it down just for this one bone, just for this one axis. Let's see if we can replicate that in our test environment. And so in this case, it doesn't, relative to Ryo, the values are definitely weird, but relative to the origin, could that work and stuff like that. So the next thing that I really want to try is at the top in block 1, there are instructions for which node to animate. And so right now I'm really interested in node number 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's one of these two. For node 8 specifically for the foot, because that's I guess likely foot position. So if we play around with foot position and just get, isolate that and just see how that works for the animation and put in different values, or just isolate that or isolate a single axis, then I think that means that we should be able to start seeing, start breaking down, can we put the foot out to the, can we put the foot out in one direction? Can we put the foot start forward? If Ryo isn't moving forward, then what happens to the foot and things like that? So we can start seeing what happens in the game, what bugs can we introduce? Can we replicate those bugs, or can we replicate that, or do the weird things that we see out of the game, can we replicate those inside the game, things like that. So what I'm going to do next is start going through and creating my own animation files, which are just isolated bones, to start viewing them one at a time rather than in a sequence, to see specifically how the game reacts to different settings or different versions of the file, and then from there we can go through and start to see if we can replicate that in the file. In terms of just two last quick things to address. In terms of FK versus IK, I have never dealt with IK before, so I would be more than happy if that ends up not being the case. But just in terms of having the foot update the knee and the thigh, that just kind of seems to be the calling card, because normally with FK, the parent bone will always affect the children bones, and the children bone won't affect the parent bone. So if the child bone is affecting the parent bone, that means it's doing an inverse something. So it seems likely, it seems reasonable. It would be nice if that weren't the case, but we have to kind of go where the evidence kinds of points us. And if we go where the evidence points us and we create tests and the tests to kind of test it, then we're wrong. Then you can be wrong. You can get more information. You can rethink and you can reapproach. So that's the other thing is, there's a lot of theory crafting that goes into doing this, and it's kind of like placing your bets on a roulette table. It's always going to be 0-0. The house is always going to win. But the thing is you put a theory down and say, okay, well, if I think if it's inverse kinematics, that we can, well, not even inverse kinematics, we can start out originally where I thought that the game would have XYZ pairs for every keyframe. And so, I wrote a log to look through to try and log what the game was reading for each frame, and I found that they were all over the place. And then I had to readjust my thinking to say that, okay, it's not XYZ for every keyframe, it's declaring XYZ, but the keyframes are independent of each other for each axis, and then you have to go through and interpolate in between. So a similar story for this is you can say, okay, well, we can have Ryo, we can see how he works. My prediction is that if if we just isolate the foot Y position and see how that works, I predict that that's going to be inverse kinematics. You can create a test to do that in game, and when you're wrong, you can go back and say, well, I was wrong about inverse kinematics, but that gave me a point to get more information and see, gain more information about the game is actually doing, and then kind of refine your process from there. So it's always a process of theory craft, test, get more information, be wrong, but use that information as a stepping point for the next thing you can predict and be wrong about, and just kind of work your way there. But as far as first try goes, and as far as horribly failing and possibilities, this is actually a very, very mild result, and somewhat encouraging, as batshit insane as that may look. So I'm going to go ahead and start breaking down the animation file, creating my own animation files to see what I can get the game to interpret, and then record that output, and then see if we can make any predictions or make any guesses, or see how we can start replicating that out of game. So this was a little bit longer recording than I anticipated it to be. Thanks for listening. If you're still listening, you're awesome. Bye bye.